everyone, welcome to my January wrap-up. This time I'm going to do it in order of least favorite to favorite. So starting with the two DNFs that I had, the first one is called The Clinic by Kate Quinn, I think. This was a NetGalley arc, and this one was not a bad book by any means. I just don't think it was for me. I got 25% in before I stopped reading because it just seemed like a very typical thriller and it just wasn't really holding my attention. And you're following two different perspectives, and the first perspective was Kara, who worked at the rehab center, and I just didn't feel like her perspective really was necessary and it was kind of boring. But I guess before I get into that, this book is about this woman who does drugs, and apparently her sister does too. And she discovers that her famous actress sister went to this rehab for like rich people, and she ended up passing away there, supposedly from a drug overdose, but she knows better. She thinks that it was murder. And so, because she has an in, because she's also an addict, although she doesn't want to admit it, she decides to pose as a patient and go to this rehab facility. And it was a little bit annoying because she's there to find out what happened to her sister. But in reality, a lot of this book was just about her also being a drug addict and not being aware of it or not wanting to admit to it. And it had a really slow start. And this is quite a long book. It's like over 400 pages. And I just wasn't into it. I just didn't care about her rehab. I didn't care about the characters, and I could already tell 25% in that even if I read the whole thing, I would maybe give this like a 3-star because I didn't hate it. The writing was good and it wasn't a terribly bad book, but I just could tell it wasn't for me. I had the same issue with this as I had with The Sanatorium by Sarah Pierce, where I thought it was going to have all of these gothic vibes being set in this remote rehab that seemed really interesting and fun, and I wanted to learn more about the rehab part of it rather than the patients there. But I didn't have any of that atmosphere, which is the problem I had with the Sarah Pierce book. That one was set at a sanatorium, but again, it didn't have any of those like creepy gothic vibes in the background, which is what I was also missing from this book. I just thought with the cover and the premise it would be a little bit more atmospheric than it was. So I decided not to waste my time. And then the next one I DNF'd was The Cruel Prince by Holly Black. This one I actually was listening to the audiobook with my husband on the way home from St. George, and we both didn't really like it. We didn't really care for it. I got to page like 125 before I stopped. And this one, I just wasn't really into the characters, wasn't really into the premise. So this is about a family of humans, but they have a sister who's a fairy. And so right in the beginning, right in the first chapter, the sister's real dad comes and murders their parents and then takes them back to the fairy realm to raise them. Fine, fine, fine. But what really drove me nuts is our main character, she hates being in the fairy realm because everybody's mean, everybody bullies her. The fairies are able to manipulate humans and do cruel things to them. But yet her sister keeps saying, well, let's go back to the human world and live there. I can get an apartment. I can support us. She's like, no, I don't want to do that because the fairy realm's all I know. I'd be too scared in the human world. I don't know anything about the human world. So she wants to stay. And that just seems nonsensical to me because she's being treated so poorly by everybody. And she's been forced to live with the guy that has murdered her parents. Although apparently she kind of loves him now in some weird way. I don't know. Maybe because he technically raised her, but I don't know. But she was like 7, I think, when they came to the fairy realm. So it's not like she doesn't have any memories of the being in the world of humans. So it shouldn't be like completely out of her comfort zone. And not only that, but she did it with the fairy realm. She only knew about the human world, and then she was forced to figure out what the fairy realm is about. She can't do that again with the human realm. Like, her motivations for staying just didn't make sense to me. It was just there because the plot needed her to be there, basically. And this whole entire book is about bullying, and I don't want to read about that. That's all it was. This horrible, horrible fairies that hate them because they're human. I have to laugh at my husband because I kept saying, oh, her and Caden or Camden or whatever his name is, Carden. So I was like, oh, her and Carden are, that's going to be like the love angle. That's going to be the relationship in the book. And he was so adamant about, no, he hates her though, and he treats her so poorly. And he wrote her name down like 1,000 times, but it was like in a hateful way. And I'm like, well, yeah, that's because he likes her. That's because he likes her, because he's writing her name down obsessively because he actually does like her, but he's not supposed to like her because she's human and he doesn't like humans. And he's just like, well, that's dumb. So I understood where it was coming from, but he was a little bit too cruel to her and to others. And I don't know, I'm the type of the person that I need to relate to the relationship. I needed to relate to the characters. And when you have this awful, awful man, I'm supposed to root for your relationship with him? No. I don't like toxic relationships. I don't know what that is trying to say to the young girls that are going to be reading this. That, oh, it's okay if he's mean to you as long as it's because he likes you. Like, what message is that supposed to send to our kids that read this? It rubs me the wrong way. I don't like that. And the whole justification behind it is because he was also being abused by his brother, which in real life I get, most people that come from abusive families will also be abusive. But when it's a fictional world and I'm supposed to be rooting for you to have a relationship with this man, no, it's not going to happen. I'm not going to like them together. I don't want to read about endless bullying. I just don't like it. It's not for me. Sorry. So that's all I really have to say about that book. Moving on. So next we have I'm Thinking of Ending Things by Ian Reid. And I know people are going to be so sad and disappointed to hear me put this at the bottom of my list. This is probably a 1 star for me. I didn't like this book at all. I thought it was boring. I thought it was weird, but not in a good way. So basically, you have this couple, and they're in a car ride going to meet his parents at their farmhouse. And you just have endless pages of their philosophical conversations, which at times were kind of interesting, but it was just like 50 or 60 pages of just talking about random philosophical stuff. And I just had nothing to do with the plot. And it was just kind of boring. And I was just like, okay, let's get to it. So then, she's trying to decide the whole time whether she should break up with him or not. So there was one part in the beginning where she meets like the stalker that stares at her through the window, and I thought that was really intriguing, and it was giving me like pen pal vibes, and I was like, ooh, this is gonna be really good. But it was just like that one chapter, and it had nothing to do with anything really, not that I could figure out. So anyways, they finally make it to the farmhouse about halfway through and meet his parents, and then it got a little bit intriguing again because a lot of weird stuff starts to happen, and so I was like, oh, what's going on? But it only lasted like a couple pages, or a couple chapters, I meant, and then they're back in the car driving back home, and then they end up at an elementary school for some reason, or maybe it was a high school, but either way. And then crap hit the fan, and I don't like the ending. I just didn't. The twist ending, it wasn't for me. I was just like, yeah, like, I don't know. And not everything was answered, and I don't like that. I don't like ambiguity in my books. I like to have everything answered neatly. I mean, you can have a couple of things that are outliers, I guess, and I'm fine with it, but there's a lot of things that just didn't add up in this book, or that wasn't explained. And I don't know, I just didn't like the ending at all. I didn't like the twist. And then the very, very ending, I didn't think that was surprising at all. I mean, I want to say something that's a little bit spoilery, so if you don't want to hear it, go ahead and fast forward about 10 seconds. But if you've read this book, just from the title alone, the double meaning of the title, I knew the ending before I even opened the book. Before I even started it, I knew what the very end was going to be, so that wasn't a surprise at all. Okay, the spoiler is over now. So, I don't know, this just wasn't for me. I thought it was, even though it was such a short book, I feel like a lot of it was just fluff, and didn't really like the ending, and I didn't like the characters, and just didn't really like this book. And I read it because it's January and I wanted to read a lot of snowy books this month. you know, and the cover has all the snow and they're in the car. So I thought I'd at least get like some atmosphere with the snow and the cold and the scariness of driving in the snow. But no, they mention the snow like twice in passing. Like you could read this at any time of the year. So that was disappointing too. Okay, then we have Slumber Party by Christopher Pike. And I have not read a Christopher Pike book since I was a kid. But unfortunately, this is a 1-star book for me. It's definitely a product of its time. I mean, I love Fear Street. I love R.L. Stine. I love reading books from that era. You know, I like Carolyn B. Cooney and all of that. But there's so many things that rubbed me wrong about this book. It's just I understand why teenage girls during my generation were so obsessed with their weight and with looking like a beauty queen and all that, you know, and it has a lot of that in here, but these girls are just so mean to each other and so mean to themselves, you know, like this girl made mention that she was jealous of people that had anorexia and she wished she was anorexic and she wished that it was contagious so that she could catch it. And I'm just like, really? And then their other friend that is kind of chubby, they're making fun of her the entire time. And they're so mean about it, saying she has a face that only a mother would love and all of this stuff. And I don't know, I hate books like this where I'm like, why are you even friends? Like, they're always so mean to each other. And it's like, I would never treat my friends like that. And I just hate how female relationships in a lot of horror books have to be toxic. And I know some people like that and enjoy the toxicity, but I don't. I really don't. I just like, if you're gonna be friends, be friends. If you're not, then not. You know, you can have a mean girl trope without them being friends and hanging out together. Like, I don't know. It just rubs me the wrong way. I don't like it. So, not only that, but there was a time where this one girl, like her only role in the whole book was being obsessed with this guy who was not a good guy. And then the one that was a little bit chubby, she was like liking him too at first, but then he was getting like sexually aggressive and he was like mawing her. And so she was like, oh, I don't want to hang out with him anymore because he was grabbing at me, you know, which, duh. But then the other character that was her supposed friend wants to have a party, and she knows that the guy that she likes won't come without his friend. And so they're like, well, what about your friend? She won't like it if he comes. And she's like, oh no, she likes it. She's sexually aggressive. She likes that kind of stuff. And I'm like, how dare you say that about your friend that just got sexually assaulted by this guy? And then you're gonna invite him to your house. Like, well, at the house, they're at a cabin, at a ski cabin, but it's just stuff like that throughout this whole book that I just, it made me so angry and upset. And that's only like the first third of the book. So I just kind of skimmed the rest of it, and it was just very typical YA thriller from the 80s. You know, there was nothing special or profound about it. And the whole reasoning behind the bad guy or the villain, I've seen it done before lots of times, which I know isn't fair because this one came out in 1985 and was probably one of the first to actually do it. But because I'm reading it late and I've seen it lots of times, like basically if you've read the thriller, she started it, that's exactly what this book is. So that wasn't anything thrilling or compelling, or I was just like, okay, whatever. But not only that, but when they were having the motivations for the villain and what happened that night all those years ago, it was so stupid. Like the writing was just bad and the way it happened was just stupid and ridiculous. And I don't know, I don't like this. And I feel bad because I just bought like quite a few Christopher Pike books. I think I just bought like 5 of them. So hopefully I like them better than this one. It didn't have the snowy vibes I was looking for, but that's about all the good I can say about this book, unfortunately. Okay, moving on from the 1 stars to the 2 stars, and that would be A Quiet Retreat by Kirsten Magdalene, sorry. This one started out really well, and I was enjoying the plot and the characters, but I don't know, the farther we went into it, the more they drove me nuts. So this is about a group of people that go to a writing retreat at this remote cabin or B&B or something. And I was excited to read this because I read the writing retreat, and besides the ending and some of the sexual scenes, I really, really, really liked that book. And so I was like wanting to read another one that was similar. But this one does not compare. This one's not as well written and had just as ridiculous as an ending. So that was a bummer. So this one again, I was enjoying it in the beginning. I liked the setup, and it's a dual timeline. So you have the present day with the writing people, and then you have this lady that's going through her stuff in the past. I thought I knew what was going on. I thought the twist was going to be really obvious, and it wasn't, but not really in a good way. So the past POV was the POV that I actually enjoyed, and I really liked it. And I was excited to see how it connected to the other timeline. The present timeline, again, started out good, but then the writing wasn't very good. The characters drove me nuts, and it just got so dumb and ridiculous. Like, I felt like I was reading a YA novel from the 80s or 90s, honestly, just the way it was written. And like the stupid stuff that would happen, like, oh, somebody was been in my room and stole all of our cell phones, and I don't know. I just didn't care for it. It wasn't that compelling. The the thoughts of our main character and the actions of our main character drove me nuts, and I just didn't really care for it. And then the ending came. Oh, the ending. So stupid. And I hate to say that. I really don't like to bash on books. I really don't. But I had quite a few duds this month, and I have to give my honest opinion. So normally I'm really not given to book bashing, but the ending was just so dumb. So dumb. So the main like bad guy didn't even have anything to do with either timeline really, except in a very like vague, not even a vague way. I don't even know how to describe it, but it's not what you think it is, but it just doesn't make a lot of sense, and it was just ridiculous, and it was just dumb, and I can't tell you why without spoiling things. But yeah, the ending just did not work for me, and the whole thing with the hot tub, like their hot tub breaks, and they're like, "Oh, what was the deal with breaking the hot tub? Was it just to scare us or turn us against each other? Like, why would breaking a hot tub do that? Like, I don't know. It was ridiculous." So yeah, this was not a favorite. Not good. So if you want a book about a writing retreat, I would read The Writing Retreat by what is it, Andrea Bartz or something. That one's better than this one in my opinion. Okay, then we have our 3-star books. And the first one I'm going to talk about is a short story by Ruth Ware called Snowflakes. So again, I was trying to read some snowy reads this month, but this one is kind of misleading because it's called snowflakes, but they're paper snowflakes that it's talking about. So it's not even set in winter. It doesn't have any snowy vibes. So just know that going into it if you want to check it out. And this one was good. I don't really have anything bad to say about it. I didn't see the twist. Well, I kind of did see the twist coming, but not until like halfway through. And it was interesting. It was intriguing. It kept my attention. The only reason I gave it 3 stars instead of 4 is because it's a short story, and I just feel like that's not really long enough to really. Well, you know what? I might change my mind. I think I'm gonna give it a 4 star because it really was good, and it's not fair to give it a 3 star just because it's short, and I just don't particularly like short stories that much. I read them from time to time, and I do enjoy them, but it's nothing that's gonna stick with me. It's nothing that's gonna be something I rave about. But it was good. It was interesting, and I did see the twist coming, but I thought it was an interesting twist, and even having a twist in a short story, I mean, is pretty good. So I guess I'm gonna give that a 4 star. But anyways, this was a good one. So my real 3 star, we're gonna do Road of Bones by Christopher Golden, and I wanted to read this because I read The Hollows in October, and I really enjoyed that one a lot. I thought it was really good. So I wanted to read something else by this author, and this one was snowy and would fit the vibes that I wanted very well. So I chose this one. And I don't know how to feel about this. I keep thinking about it and thinking about it, and a part of me really liked it, and a part of me was just like, eh. So basically, you have this man and his friend, and they're doing like a documentary over in Siberia about this road called the Road of Bones because these people that built the road were part of the gulags under the Soviet Union. And so when they would die, they would just like bury them under the permafrost of this road. And so you're driving on these people's bones. Very interesting, very good premise. So I don't know. I guess I wanted this to be supernatural in a different way. Like I wanted more of like a ghost story or like more about like these bones and all that stuff. But really this is like a nature goes against man type of story. And that's just not really my favorite subgenre. And so I was really into it in the beginning. You know, it had some mystery. It had all the snowy, creepy, scary driving and the snow vibes that I wanted. And, you know, I really liked it. But then when I found out what this book was actually about, I don't know, I kind of lost interest a little bit. And there was a girl protagonist in this that just drove me nuts. She just, I don't know. The way she would talk, the way she would act, I just kind of wanted to smack her sometimes. But I don't know, I didn't hate this book by any means. I thought it was well written. I thought it was good. It just wasn't particularly my brand of horror that I necessarily like. So it's not a bad book. It just wasn't necessarily for me. It's very short though. It's only like 235 pages or something. Like, yeah, it's like 228 pages. So it's kind of dense though. So even though it's the page count isn't very long, it took longer to get through it like a normal novel would, just because it was a little bit dense to read, but which isn't a bad thing, but just know that going in. So, anyways, I did like this book. I just didn't love this book. Okay, moving on to the 4 stars. We have Stolen Tongues. And this one might actually be more of a 3.5 if I'm being honest. So this is about a man and his girlfriend who go up to a cabin and they come against this creature or this entity that's terrorizing them. And this was a fun read because the prologue in particular was very, very good. It was very creepy, very scary. The setup was fantastic, but I really think this book suffers from being a debut, and I think this author just kind of needs to stretch his literary muscles a little bit more because not everything made sense and the timeline was off. It just wasn't as good as it could have been. It definitely had the potential to be a very good book because there was parts that were very scary and very creepy, and I really enjoyed the story for the most part. But at the same time, there was some problematic things about it and not everything was explained. And again, I like my books to answer my questions. I don't really like the ambiguity. And then the ending, I didn't really care for the ending. The ending was not my favorite. And I was hoping for more from the ending. It just kind of petered out and it was a bit disappointing. And this is one of those novels where it's very creepy and very scary, and a lot of things happen all the time. Like, there's not really a break. But sometimes I think that can be detrimental instead of a good thing. Because, in my opinion, if you talk about the scary thing too often and too much, it starts to feel a little bit repetitive and it starts to be less scary, in my opinion. You know, I'm more apt to be scared by something that's a little bit like mysterious and in the background. But when it's shoved in your face like every page, it just kind of lessens the creepy factor, in my opinion. But I don't know. I really did enjoy my time with it. It was a really fast read. I flew through it very quickly. But at the same time, I feel like this could have been a novella and it would have been better. Like if you would have cut out 100 pages, I think it would have been tighter and stronger. And like I said, there was some issues I had with the plot, but I can't really tell you what they are because I don't want to spoil things for anybody. But I just feel like not everything added up. And I had some issues with the mental health rep in this book. You know, the main character was constantly asking what's wrong with her, but at the same time, when she wants to talk to a psychiatrist or go to the doctor, she's always like, no, they're just going to put you in the nut house. Is that what you want? Do you want people to poke and prod you? You know, and then they do go to the doctor at one point, and the doctor like makes a comment that, oh yeah, she was loony or something, which I don't think a real doctor would joke about that if it was meant to be a joke. And I don't know, it just didn't sit well with me. And he kept saying like, oh, you're gonna go to a filthy asylum and stuff. And I'm like, okay, we're not living in the 19th century. You know, I just didn't feel like the mental health rep was very good in this. But I don't know. I mean, I did enjoy reading this. I really did. But I do feel like it was problematic. I do feel it had some issues. It could have been edited better. Not so much for like typos and stuff, but for other issues. So, anyways, I probably 3.5 is probably what I would give this book. It did have all the snowy vibes and all the isolation vibes that I wanted, so that was good. The next 4-star read I'm going to talk about is A Place for Vanishing. This was a NetGalley ARC that I received for a free book review, and this is a YA novel. I would classify this as probably more of a dark fantasy. It definitely had some horror elements, but it seemed a little bit more fantastical in my opinion. But I really enjoyed this one. This is about a girl and her sister and her mom who moved to this new place, and it was like an inherited house from her grandparents, but her mom didn't like the house and never wanted to live there, but then they had some financial problems and all of a sudden she wanted to move there. And so she's like, Mom, I thought you hated this house. And she's like, oh no, this is my childhood house. I love this house. So anyways, obviously something else was going on with the mom. So if you don't like bugs, then probably don't read this because there's a lot of bug talk in here and it can be a little bit squeamish, but it was very unique. I had elements that I liked, hauntings and seances and stuff, but it also had these fantastical elements that were very unique and made it a completely different story than I would have thought. It's not like anything else I've read, and so I really enjoyed that aspect of it. I will say, like, the last 100 pages was like the climax. It just went on a little too long. It was just like, okay, let's get rid of these ghosts or these entities or whatever. And it just goes on and on and on and on and on, which, most people might enjoy because some people like a lot of action in their books. And for the most part, I do too. But at the same time, I think there's a difference between having a lot of action and being boring. Like, people get the mistaken idea that in order to be fast paced, you have to have lots of action. And that's not true. You can have a fast paced book and still have other things going on besides just the action. And even action, 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 even that can be boring in my opinion. So I don't know. I thought the climax part of this book went on too long, but that's just my opinion. But for the most part, I really enjoyed this. I thought it was well done. I thought it was interesting and it was different, and I really enjoyed it. Okay, my next 4-star read would be No One Can Know by Kate Alice Marshall. And this one, it was my first by this author, and I thought she was a really good writer. I thought the writing was strong, and her characterization was really good. None of these characters felt two-dimensional. They all felt fleshed out, and I felt like I got to know these characters, and so I really enjoyed that. So this is about these 3 sisters. When they were kids, their parents were murdered. And so the one thing I don't like about thrillers like this is they always use that trope of, I can't really remember what happened that on that day so long ago, or I can't remember my childhood or whatever. And I don't know. I kind of hate that trope, to be honest. Like, I understand you need it to make a story like this work, but it just drives me nuts. Like, who doesn't have any childhood memories? And if you had a traumatic experience happen to you, you would definitely remember it. And it's always like, oh, and then 20 years later, I'm finally wondering about it. I'm finally thinking about it, and it just doesn't seem realistic to me. But, it's like, okay, well, as long as I know that that's what the story is about, I can get behind it and just roll my eyes and move on. So even though it drives me nuts, I understood going in that that's what this was going to be. She moves into her childhood home after the death of her parents, and then she wants to, again, figure out what really happened that day. And they're going through financial problems. Her husband just lost his job and she just found out she's pregnant. And so normally she wouldn't dream of living in this house that her parents got murdered in, but she needs a place to live. So she goes there and she's a little bit worried about what her sisters are going to think about it, but she hasn't talked to her sister since it happened. They kind of went their separate ways, but she can't sell the house without their consent because all of their names are on the title because it was handed down to all of them. So she's trying to get into contact with her sisters to see if they were okay with her fixing up the house and then selling it. So for the most part, I really enjoyed this book. I thought it was really well written. Again, I liked the characters. I liked that they were fleshed out. The ending, I felt like she was trying too hard to be twisty. Not really twisty, but she was trying too hard to subvert who the person was that killed their parents. So she's like, maybe it's this person. No, maybe it's this person. Maybe it's this person. Maybe it's this person, which is fine. but I wish it was like sprinkled out more throughout the book. I felt like at the ending it was just like whiplash, like bam, 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 bam. And then it ended up being who I thought it was the whole time anyways. So I don't know. That was a little bit disappointing. And then there was one part that I felt that was a plot hole that didn't make any sense, but I can't really say what it is because again, it would be a major spoiler. But there was one aspect about the beginning that didn't add up for me. So the ending wasn't necessarily my favorite, but on the whole, I really did enjoy reading it. So I feel like I would recommend this for people that like thrillers. My next 4-star read would be Midnight on Beacon Street. This was a NetGalley arc that I received, and it was a lot shorter than I thought it was originally. It's more like a novella length, and I really enjoyed this one, but at the same time, there's not that much to say about it. Like, I wasn't obsessed with it. I didn't completely fall in love with it. But I don't really have any criticisms necessarily either. So I guess what I'm saying is it was just okay. And I'm glad that it was short. But this is more about the characters than the plot, I felt. You spend a lot of time learning about the kids and about the mom and different things. So this is about a babysitter who's babysitting these two kids, and then different things go down that night that are potentially scary or earth-shattering. So I did enjoy those parts of it, but then there was a lot of parts that was just kind of meandering a little bit. But I did enjoy this one. I know it makes it sound like I didn't, but I really did. But I don't know, it just wasn't like, it's not one that you finish and you're just like, wow, that was amazing. It was just like, okay, well, that was good, moving on. It was set in the 90s, and I did enjoy the 90s vibes, and I did enjoy all the references to horror movies. I thought that was really fun, and I really liked that aspect of the story. And I do like that the characters were well developed. So yeah, it was enjoyable. I liked this one. I would recommend it. Okay, now we're gonna move on to my 2 5-star reads of the month. And the first one is Erased. Well, actually, this one might be a 4.5 because the ending was a little bit of a letdown. So this might be more of a 4.5 for me. But this is a manga series and it's a thriller. And there's 5 volumes, and I read the first 3 from my library last year, I think it was. And I was thinking that was all that there was. And I was like, well, what? That ending's a little bit disappointing. I don't quite understand. I knew who the killer was by that point, but I didn't understand like what was going on completely. So I felt a little bit let down. But then I recently discovered that there's actually 5 volumes. So I was like, oh, why? That's because I didn't finish the story. So I reread the first 3 and then read the last 2. So I got the entire series for Christmas. So I love this series. I love the characters. It was very intriguing. It was very fun. So this manga is about this man, and he's got this unique ability, which he calls revival. So he has the ability to go back in time. So like he'll see if that something's out of place, and then it will bring on the revival, and he'll fix whatever was off. So in other words, it's like a little boy crosses the street, but he's about to get hit by a truck, and so he'll see the same scene over and over and over again, and then realize what's about to take place and then save the boy or whatever. Anyway, so apparently this is something that happens a lot for him, but then something happens. I don't want to say what that something is, but something happens in his life, and he ends up having a revival that's more than just a few minutes. It's like years and years. And so he ends up being sent back to when he was a kid because there was things that happened in his childhood that led up to the events of the present. And so he's trying to figure out what this is. And so he discovers that there's 3 kids in his elementary school that ended up being kidnapped and murdered when he was a child. And so he's trying to save these children from having that happen to them. And so he kind of befriends them and tries to get them away from the kidnapper. And it's very fun. It's very intriguing. I really enjoyed it a lot. I will say, though, that the ending was a little bit of a letdown. Everything was wrapped up nicely, and I liked that. But I felt like the ending was a little bit too easy. And I was just like, okay, like, I don't know. I don't want to, like, give anything away, but it was just like catching the bad guy was like a little bit too easy in my opinion, and so it was a little bit disappointing. I wanted the climax to be a little bit longer and a little bit more complex. And then the 5th volume, I guess, isn't really part of the story. It's more or less they take 3 or 4 characters from the story and then they tell parts of the story from their point of view or from their perspective. And so it really wasn't an add-on to the story at all. It was just like, this is what was happening with this character at this time, and this is how they thought about it, you know? So it wasn't really part of the series. Like, you don't have to read that last one. So I still enjoyed it, but I didn't know that that's what it was. So just be aware of that. But no, I love this. I thought it was really good. I really enjoyed it. And as you could tell from the cover, it was snowy, had some snowy vibes. So I thought I'd binge it this month. So the last book I read that was a 5-star, by far my favorite book of the month, was Boys in the Valley by Philip Fracassi. I loved this one. I thought it was so good. I was a little bit nervous because it's religious horror and I'm not really into religious horror. So this is a possession story, and most possession stories kind of follow the same formula, the same plot lines, and it can be a little bit boring. But this doesn't. It's very unique. It's a very different possession story than what I'm used to reading, and I loved it. I thought it was great. So despite being about boys, though, this is not YA. This definitely has a lot of gore and a lot of violence against children. So be aware of that if that's triggering for you, because it is heartbreaking, and I'll admit it's hard to read. And it's one of those books that you don't want to admit that you love it because it's terrible at the same time. And so you don't want to be like, I love this book. It was terrible, you know, like, I don't know if that makes sense, but you're almost afraid to admit that you loved a book that was so heartbreaking and had so much harm towards children, because you don't want it to sound like you're advocating for harm against children, if that makes sense. But I just thought it was really good. I really liked the characters. You know, it had the good guys and the bad guys, and then it had this one priest called Johnson, and he was very interesting because he was definitely a bad guy, but he also had moments where he could almost be a good guy a little bit, and then he would like revert back to being the bad guy. And but he was very interesting to read about. I also liked that this one was set in the 1900s. I thought it lent it to a more creepier, scarier atmosphere because it was set during that time. And I always like more historical gothic books anyway, so for me, I thought that was great that they did it during that time period. I really thought that the story benefited from it. And I just really enjoyed this. I thought it was very fast paced. I thought it was fun. I thought it was interesting. I thought it had scary moments. It had human evil and it had possession. And I just thought it was well written. I just really liked it. I thought it was really good. I was a little bit nervous that it wouldn't stick the landing, but I even enjoyed the ending. I thought it was good. So I would highly recommend this one. It definitely had all the snowy cold vibes I was looking for as well. So those are all of the books I have for you. I hope you enjoyed this wrap up. And again, if you like this video, please consider pushing that like button. It really helps me out. Leave me a comment and let me know what was your favorite book of January, or what books didn't meet your expectations. And I'll see you next time. See ya.